Welcome to Information Return Intelligence, the podcast that keeps you ahead of the curve on 1099s and Form 1042S and everything in between, W-9s and all of those things that fall under the heading of information returns. My name is Jason Dinesen. I'm an enrolled agent. I've been a tax accountant for many years and have been teaching continuing education courses and other tax and accounting related topics since 2012. The very first thing I ever taught on in 2012 was 1099s. I'm still teaching on 1099s and information forms nowadays, and people call me the 1099 guy. So, welcome to the Information Return Intelligence Podcast. So, on today's episode, we're talking about the $600 threshold, which has been with us for a very long time. How long? Well, would you believe that it's been around since Eisenhower was president? That's true. It's older than rock and roll, actually. 1954 is when this became a part of the tax code, the $600 threshold. See, 1954 was a big year for taxes because there was major tax reform that year. And that tax reform created Section 6041 of the tax code. Now, that's our 1099 reporting requirement, is Section 6041 for 1099 miscellaneous. And there had been information reporting before that, but what we know of today comes from Section 6041 with a $600 threshold in 1954. And when Congress wrote the law, they didn't index it for inflation. And that's why the $600 threshold, 71 years later, it's still $600. And people would ask me, why doesn't the IRS change that? And the answer is the IRS couldn't change it. It took an act of Congress to do it because it was hard coded into the law. So the big, beautiful bill, which was signed into law earlier this year, changes the threshold to $2,000 starting next year, not this year. By the way, another trivia item. Did you know that it was July of 1954 when Elvis recorded his first single? And it wasn't till really 1956 that Elvis had his first hit. So this $600 threshold, it's been around longer than Elvis, if you could believe that. So now it's finally changing, but not immediately. It'll be $2,000 in 2026. This will be for forms that you file in January of 2027. So that means you get one last ride with the $600 threshold for the 2025 forms that you'll be filing in, depending on when you're listening to this, a couple months or thereabouts, January, when you're filing 2025 forms, you'll be using $600. And maybe, before you push submit on the e-file, maybe just linger a little bit and let the memories flood over you of all the good times with the $600 threshold. Because it'll be ending once you hit submit and those forms are sent off. Never again will you use $600 as the threshold. Now, the $2,000 new number is not fixed, which means every year after next year, it'll go up a little bit with inflation. So in 2027, it'll probably be like 2,100 or 2,200. And with each passing year, it'll go up a little bit. So that means the set it and forget it rule that we had with the $600 threshold is gone. So your filters and everything will need to be adjusted every year to accommodate that new number for the year. Now, is that the end of the world? No. But it is something that you'll have to build into your procedures going forward. Now, the IRS does tell us well in advance what those inflation adjustments are. For example, the 2026 inflation amounts, they released those on October 9th this year. So you'll know 2.5 to 3 months in advance of the start of a new year what the inflation adjustments will be for that year. But you will have to build in a procedure to think about, how are we going to filter for the dollar threshold every year? What does this change apply to? Well, it's anything under Section 6041 or 6041A of the tax code. Easy for me to say. What does that mean in plain English? It basically means your typical AP transactions that you report on 1099s. Contract labor, rent, other income, medical and health care, and gross proceeds paid to an attorney. Anything that had a $600 threshold in the past will be reset to $2,000 starting next year. Now, what if your business pays royalties? Box 2 of 1099 miscellaneous. Royalties isn't on the list. Those still have a $10 threshold. Why 10? Well, it's because royalties doesn't come from Section 6041 or 6041 capital A of the tax code. Royalties are covered in Section 6050 capital N of the tax code, which was not changed in the big beautiful bill. So royalties is still $10. So what are some takeaways from this? Well, first of all, make sure that your software, whatever you're using for tracking your payments to contractors and other 1099able things, think about it. How are you going to build your filters going forward? You do have time to figure that out because it's going from 600 to 2000 and it won't be till 2027 for filings in 2028 that you'll have to worry about something other than 2000. But you'll want to figure out how to build flexibility into your system. Second thing is watch the IRS's inflation adjustment announcements. Those usually come in early October for the following years. So sometime, I would say in October of 2026, you'll know what the 2027 amounts will be. And then the third thing would just be communicate internally and make sure that anybody involved in your information reporting process is aware of this change in threshold. Now, we're about ready to wrap things up. This podcast is not intended to be long. It's 10 or 15 minutes is what the intention is. But before we go, I always like to throw out these trivia factoids for you. I gave you some earlier with the start of the $600 threshold and some things about Elvis. But how about one last one before we go? And that is, if the $600 threshold had been indexed for inflation since 1954, what dollar amount would it be today? And you can run there's different websites that'll do this. I went to the official government website, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I put in $600 in January of 1954 and then ran it through basically as far forward as I could, which is I'm recording this as September of 2025. And it comes to $7,244.61. So around $7,200. is what a real true inflation adjustment would be on the $600 threshold. So that'll do it for this week's episode. Next week, we'll talk about another possible change on the horizon. It's not official, but there's a draft of a new W-9 that's out there where the IRS is proposing to force sole proprietors to give social security numbers instead of EINs on the W-9. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but it actually could be on your side handling all of this with this proposed change. It's just a draft, so that's not official yet, but we'll talk about that next week. That's it for this edition of Information Return Intelligence. I'm Jason Dinesen. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a new episode. And if you like what you hear, share it with a colleague. Until next time, I'm Jason Dinesen saying so long.